Welcome everyone to round 2 of our responder session, and lovely to see 15 in here already. And I really, for me, I don't want to interrupt where we were just going with that last session. And I think when we proposed the theme of hope for this session, and we put the provocation from David Orr, as the 3 days have evolved, one of the things we've been saying to each other is, let's put that out there as an invitation, but not really police it. And the game of a fishbowl forum, which I've had described to me by Charlotte, I've never actually taken part in one before, so here you go, just kind of leaping into it, is that at any one time we have up to 4 people. Ideally would keep 4 people on the screen, but it may be that we have less than 4 if people are feeling on the back foot about stepping forward, if that works. And there's no chair, and we each, in the way we have been, offer some element, some encounter, some thread, an idea within a conversation or a talk that spoke to us, and we take as a kind of point of reference for that how it's nudged or affected or colored or confirmed our understanding of hope. And what hope means to us in this context. And obviously that's been coming up already. I know who I'm bringing, but I'm going to I've been doing lots of responding, and I'll just hold it for now and see who else comes into the room. And maybe what other people say will provoke you. If you don't want to come on screen, you can just put it into chat and we'll kind of make this up. If we don't have 4 people on screen, we'll just carry on exactly as we have been. And hopefully sort of leave a space for people to come in who haven't spoken yet. But as we go, I'd also want people who have spoken not to feel that they've kind of shot their bolt and now they mustn't say anything else. So we'll try and strike a balance there between keeping the space open, especially to start with, for any new voices that might need a bit of a pause before they sort of find the temerity to come press share audio and video. But that said, I think also often those who are listening are not necessarily being marginalized by other people talking more. They're enjoying other people talking more, and they're happy to listen. So I work on that basis too. It's a sort of, some people talking more than others is a dynamic created by all of us, not some of us, if that makes sense. Have I missed anything? I have. There's a thread here that we have not quite worked out how to integrate. And I can see that at this stage, we don't really have a plan for how to integrate it. So I'm just going to say it's one of the options that you could come on and say, but I don't want to sort of too complicate this session. We said we do replies to COP, messages to COP. And where, how, we haven't really, somehow we got to lunch today and we still hadn't quite got a plan. So I think the air could contain messages to COP as we're talking, but they don't have to. That's a fairly vague briefing. You can see that the discipline is starting to go. But, Mark, you're in front of me, so you might like to go first. And I think Michelle was here a minute ago, and
Michelle seems to have disappeared.
Why don't you go first, and then if Michelle wants to come back in, Richard's holding the. He's got his hand on the door, I think, and he can sort of let people in. So I just see who appears.
Okay.
Here's Michelle. You go while Michelle's coming in. You go ahead.
Can you hear me clearly? Oh, good. Okay, so the thing that keeps coming to me, and I thoroughly enjoyed the session before this one, the wrap-up was really lovely. And there's so much that I could pick up on, but I'll pick up on a detail which came up this morning, but it's been a kind of thread through the things I've seen, and that's this idea of purity, of how we always are looking in some way for purity. And you said something about monotheistic religion with its sort of desire phobic focus on purity. And then it was also in tandem with something that seemed to do with not erasure, that's not the word, but sort of not extinction, but a word like that. Anyway, I'm not being very clear there, but purity. Let's just stick with purity because then it's a bit more simple. And just when I didn't see this session, but the the artist who was to do with putting fungi on dead bodies. It almost seems to me like there's a sort of hill to climb or to get over or something like this about purity and about cleanliness and about letting go of some of our ideas of what cleanliness are to I don't know, something about that. It's really struck me. I don't know what it's got to do with hope, but I hope we can let go of some of our ideas of cleanliness in order to be, to actually, the whole idea of the relationship with earth is it's also quite grubby, in some ways, and our sterility and our desire for sterility and purity in all sorts of different ways kind of interferes with that, I feel. And that's something that came up for me in this, actually, because I find it quite painful now to see, both in myself and in people at large in society, how addicted we are to cleanliness, tidiness, all the things that are anti-life, really, because they're antibiotic, which means anti-life. It's like, so there's a relation there with death, and I would hope for me would be that we would relax around those things, and be happy to submit our physical body at the end of our time to have a layer of mycelial structure over us to help us to decay into the earth and therefore be part of the earth. It's really quite practical and really quite physical. So that's what I wanted to say.
We haven't really set a rule for responding, but I just, as Michelle comes in, I just want to say it might well be that you want to come and just reply to something somebody else has said as your contribution to that ongoing conversation, and that too is most welcome. Michelle, over to you. Thanks, Mark.
So maybe in relation, or coming out of what you just said, Mark, because that resonates with me, I'm going to start by being a little bit messy. So my response, and I think it's about how one interprets obviously hope, but I have it's like it makes me stumble. If I was walking along, it'd be the thing that would make me stumble slightly. And there's this artist, Irina Hajduk, who was born in the 1980s in Serbia, and she draws on this old Balkan saying, and the saying is that hope is a whore. Now, obviously, as a feminist, I have a bit of an issue with the old saying, but in some ways it chimes with me because of the thing of a sort of waiting around that hope sometimes can encourage, I think, and there is a messiness and imperative to now. And I think one of the things that many of the things that was in Bayo's original keynote was about refusals, and a sort of and why I found that so an invigorating point to start with, because there was a real vitality in his idea of the new cosmology of death. And I think he said something like, life needs death to be lively, and within all that liveliness there is a messiness. And I think and he talked about refusals of continuity, and somehow that links to my problems around hope and the need to sort of enact action now, and your discussion around messiness. Yeah, that's it, I think. Thanks.
I think for me, I have been feeling tremendous sadness at the politics of the last couple of years, which I think the pandemic response and the overt corruption that appears to have been manifestly illuminated through that only adds to the my sadness at the politics around the ecological grief. So I've been finding that quite a difficult sphere to live in for a while. And so coming into this space and the poetry and the magic and the tenderness of the interactions has been utterly sublime. And I think, and I don't mean to pick any one person out, but I loved Caroline Ross's words this morning about how we, and I'm afraid I'm probably going to paraphrase slightly, how we can seek to exist in the world as it is. And she said something close to, awe is the correct response and laughter the medicine. And I just thought that was so beautiful. So thanks everybody for a wonderful time.
Hi. Yes, I was at the session this morning with Caroline and Tom and Matt as well. And I wanted to say I've just walked into Glasgow on a pilgrimage from the east coast of Scotland, Dunbar, across Scotland to Glasgow. And so we arrived in Glasgow on Saturday and made a procession up the main streets of Glasgow with the Serpent of Capitalism, which was a big sculpture, a blown up sculpture, which shed its skin metaphorically to say what we all hope will happen, that capitalism will go into the background. And I wanted to just say that Tom said this morning in his preparation for his story, I hope this space will be welcome. He was talking about leaving some silence for us to read the words on the screen, and that and the waiting that Michelle was talking about is what I found on the pilgrimage, that as we walked and walked and walked through the rain, there was this space to connect with nature, to connect with each other, and to prepare ourselves for walking into Glasgow. So for me, I think hope has something to do with making space. Thank you.
I mentioned in the chat, but I'll say I was in the skull drawing workshop this morning, and the lady, I think her name was Susan, she kept on referring to the skulls as nicknames like Bob and Fred and Frank, rather than the scientific catalogue number that they have in the museum. I think we have a natural want to personalize things, the way we see faces in trees and things like that we want to humanize and form this intimacy and this bond with the things that we see. And I think I know Smat, I can't say his name, sorry, but when he was talking about the funeral practices in Armenia and how the modernization is stopping this intimacy that you have with the corpse and the intimacy with the funeral rites. Where am I going with this? I just find it interesting. I think that personalization of death, and that you have to, in my personal life, we used to have wakes, so you'd sit with the body, you'd watch the body. As a child, I remember that, and now we don't do it, and the grieving process is different now. There's a distance, and I think it's unnatural, and it's important that we sort of gain this intimacy again.
I totally agree. So I'm going to respond to what you said, Catherine, there. Oh, you've gone. You can stay here. Oh, no, here you are. And also what Mark was saying really about purity. I think one of the things, I've been very anti-hope. I have to, that's my confession. And I live in a cottage called Hope Cottage, so I should know better. But I think partly the problem is because when people talk about hope, it's always like some whoosh. If you say hope, it's like, woo, you're out of your body somehow. You're not in the physical world, you know. And so I think but because we've opened this session, and also because people have been talking about it in different ways, throughout the whole 3 days. Now here in different, very different contexts. I've been looking at it in more as Matt originally wrote for the call out for this particular session, that it's an attitude, that it's a way of responding. And I think part of our problem is sort of what you were saying about institutions there, and it's so much of what when hope or the future is talked about, it's in these abstract terms, this institutionalized language, which has nothing to do with the physical world. And what I've really enjoyed was certainly listening to lots of the artists here, whether it was Tom with his relationship with stones, or Caroline with making her swords or her deerskin clothes, you paying attention to that roadkill on the bypass. You know, it's really physical and it's really beautiful, but it's just there. It's like, you know, and I just cannot, what I get so fed up with are these discussions, whether it's government or whether it's activism, it's all up here and in the abstract, you know, and that doesn't make me feel very hopeful. But when people are talking about actually really engaging, making space, as Tamsin's just been talking about, making space to really be with the planet, you know, to really be with each other and to make those spaces so we can really get that connection back, because that's where there's life. Death is up in the head. That's where real death is, because it's got nothing to do with life. But anyway, that's me. It's a bit of a rant in a goldfish bowl. But I just like to say, and I really loved your drawings, Catherine. Thank you.
Thank you, Sean.
Looks like it's just us two at the moment.
No, it's making me very nervous.
No,
Catherine Edwards is coming. Hello, Catherine.
I'm going to elbow in. I have to say, as a tangent to my tangent, I'm reveling at the numbers of Catherines who are present. Well,
with the same spelling.
Isn't it marvellous? So rare. Typical. Well, I've worked for a long time in the death trade, mostly as a celebrant, but I did apprentice myself as an undertaker because I think it's rude not to. I think you can only really help people if you've got some understanding of the materiality of death and funerals, you know, how to make a dead person look nice in the box and what it means to drive to Heathrow to pick up the lead-lined coffin. I think you need to know all that. But my observation is that loads of people in the death trade are, as it were, burying someone themselves. A lot of people who aren't born into the trade have been shunted there by a radical personal experience. And I suppose more broadly than that, I've observed in this conference, this gathering, that an awful lot of people here are motivated in their interests by personal, very, very direct personal experience. And I find that, on the one hand, very moving, because these experiences are transmuted into something functional and thoughtful and beautiful. But also it seems to highlight to me the gap between people who have thought about death, bereavement, extinction, the materiality, the reality of life and death. People who haven't thought about that, living these clean, as Mark says, clean, sanitized, very modern life, separate from filth and rot and the risk of material life, where you might eat something and die because you're living on the front line. It's unrealistic, and motivated, I suppose, by the attention that's been given recently to Molly Meach's private members' bill in the Lords to get assisted dying brought forth into the conversation as a way to swerve our over-medicalised deaths. I've noticed, as someone with a particular interest in that strategy, that there's so much resistance to talking about assisted dying from people who haven't got a clue, haven't seen a dead body, haven't seen a dying body, haven't lain in bed next to a dead body. You know, what the heck? They're not qualified. They shouldn't be in the conversation. So that's my rant in the goldfish bowl, Charlotte. That's that's what came pouring out for me as I was just watching this micro conversation.
Hello. I don't know. Sorry, Matt. Are you going to say something?
You go first, Tom. It's cool. You go first.
I don't have anything. I just wanted to add to Catherine's point about the experience of death. And I don't know. I feel like in my mind, it is something that has been with me as long as I can remember, thinking about mortality. And maybe I was in the health session earlier, the borrowing time session, and thinking about chronic illness. And I wonder, having an illness, I'm asthmatic, but it maybe always just holds a sense of mortality more tangibly than if I hadn't had an illness. I don't know what it's like to not have asthma, for example. But then at a relatively young age, having my grandpa died, and then my stepmom died, and which I talked about earlier. And I think they're very profound experiences in the way that one then perceives life. And then, I know I found meeting somebody of a similar age to myself, 40-ish, and they haven't experienced death. And I think, gosh, what must that be like, to be sort of that far into your life and not have experienced the loss of someone, or not had that loss also trigger something in your own mind to then ponder what that is. What is there an end to life, or what? All those questions that come with facing the end of a physical life.
I call those death virgins.
Yeah, death virgins.
They haven't been there and been touched by it.
That's a good name for them.
Yeah, that's really true.
Good band name there.
Death virgins, yeah.
I also think the whole thing about what Sophie was talking about a bit in the session you mentioned there, Tom, but also in her wonderful conversation with Richard a month or so ago. And it's this idea of, that we're so separate, we don't have any relationship with life. And so this whole idea of rot and decay, which is so much part of the natural process, is completely left out of the human world. It's like, we're not going to go anywhere near it. And sometimes by engaging in the physical world, like I do a lot of fermentation. So it's just knowing actually that when things break down, that's when the savers come, that's when you change form, other things alchemize you. Otherwise, we're just sterile creatures. And human beings aren't sterile. We're moving and changing all the time. So I found this conversation, and I'm going to get back to hope in a minute, Matt. I find it hopeful that we're actually moving to a more non-human, more rotting, decaying type of culture. If we understand these things, it will be much happier human beings and able to cope with or stay with the trouble of what's coming, or what is that already happening, being played out in the ecological crisis, because we'll understand the actual planet we're on. And we're not these kind of robots that are supposed to be clean and perfect and mechanical and fit into the capitalist system. And going, Richard, I can feel another rant coming on. I better stop. Anyway, Matt, I'm sure you've got something interesting to say.
No, it's really hard, isn't it, to bring an idea and then hold on to it, because then other people start talking, and I want to respond to about 6 other things that have been said. Actually, particularly the chronic and flaring illness panel, which I'm not really going to go into that because I want to bring who I was originally going to bring, but that really affected me, and I got a lot from just listening in to that discussion. But no, I realized where I wanted to go back to with hope was right back to the beginning. It was Beatrice's film, and this thing came to me, which I guess kind of repeats things that came up in conversation with Bio, but Beatrice's film had some beautiful text in it, some very kind of thoughtful text in it, but I don't mean the text. I mean the sort of embodied part of it, the dancing in it, and there was a lot of despair and grieving in it, and it just threw me back on how I always live in the verbal. And I remember chatting to Bio about, as this crisis intensifies, the essays get more frequent and longer. There's this kind of, which was a slightly cheeky thing to say to Bio, actually, because quite a lot of those essays are by him. the longest I've ever read was by him, the coronavirus essay. But he got the joke, I think. You know, there's this sense that the more we and this phrase came to me like in about 1 a.m, Mark, which is you're not going to talk your way out of this one, Matt. You know, and it's like it. And I think probably we're talking about thresholds. So maybe I'm just bringing that as my own hope threshold. Is like, I love these sessions and these spaces, and they're not entirely to do with words, but often they are mediated by talking. That's kind of big part. So I don't mean to make some kind of attempt to sort of disown that, but there's something else. And Beatrice's film really brought it to the fore for me. It's like, you're just going to live through this. I'm also reminded of President Anoti Tom in the Magnitude film, saying you just come to terms with the brutality, the brutal reality of what's happening, and then make a choice and do something. So it's to do with doing as well. But I'll leave it there. And I was going to say something about COP. I'm going to shut up and get off the stage.
Mark, is it me next? Yeah. Okay. Well, I wanted to just follow up on what Charlotte was saying about fermentation with a personal story, which kind of says the old adage of where there's life, there's hope. I'm not sure where I stand on hope particularly. I'm ambivalent about the term, in fact. But anyway, a story that shows that transformation can happen even when you're a 52 or 3-year-old, which was now several years ago, and have just been presented with probably about 7 or 8 years ago, you've just been presented with a jar of homemade ferments of wonderful cabbage and carrots and fantastic coleslaws, and I'm going to say this to everybody, and I can only see Mark now, so it just feels like I'm speaking to him, so that's okay. I just felt what happened when I was presented with this was I was absolutely fucking horrified. I thought I was going to be poisoned. I thought I was going to eat something and I would just expire on the kitchen floor right there. I didn't say this to the host. I said I think I politely declined or tasted a tiny bit. And then over the next year, I was introduced to ferment because I'd never really thought about it. And over the next year, I was introduced to fermentation in these lovely kind of synchronistic ways that often happen to me when I have made a great big statement saying no to something. And it's like, no, you're not going to say no to that. Hold on, you've got to look at this again. So within the space of about 18 months, I became totally and utterly besotted by fermentation and its alchemical a process of just transforming, this meeting, this liminal life and death place where the things rot and become actually totally delicious and and gut helping and life affirming, and you can't get away from the death part of it because things are dying and living and dying right there in the jar. And but I was very. It's a thing I think of often because we live in such an antibacterial, like I said earlier, anti-life culture, that to have a transformation in my 50s where I was like, okay, this is fantastic. I know what being obsessed with cleanliness and not being sick and all these kind of things are. And I could make that I could make that journey across to the other side. And now I even write about it occasionally and teach other people to do it. And I'm completely still obsessed with it. And I just wanted to share that because it's like, as I said, where there's life, there's hope. So that we don't have to be stuck in, this is bad just because the culture is telling us something opposite to what is actually the fact. I mean, you have to be careful with some things, but you don't generally have to be that careful with vegetables, and you don't have to be over clean. You don't have to wear a mask when you're fermenting vegetables. And that is my rant for this afternoon. I'm sure loads of you do ferment, but if you don't ferment, get fermenting. It's really brilliant.
Mr. Watson. Mr. Watson, that's interesting when you talk about alchemy, fermentation and death, and you say death is not the end. There are various descriptions of the alchemical processes wrapped up in all sorts of symbolism, so it's difficult to be sure. But one of the few things that the alchemists agree upon is that the initial stage, the start, is death, the nigredo. Jungians make much of this. There's a wonderful book by Marlon Stanton, I think, called The Black Sun. And these images of decay, depression, ego death, the descent into hell, catabasis, seem to be the first stage of the alchemical process in many ways. As I say, Jungians love it. In some ways, this is that lovely phrase, I think it's from Celine, Journey to the End of the Night. Yeah, morale has never been better since we gave up hope. Yeah.
It's interesting, Mark. So can I just say one last thing, Anna, before that? Interesting that what I didn't say was that actually, I tend to be quite dramaturgical when I express things. So, but it was terrifying. I had to move through. This is where the nigredo comes in, really, because I actually had to move through a terror. It wasn't something that I did in my mind. I was physically terrified, and I had to move through it. And that was it didn't come free in a sense. It wasn't something that was, oh yeah, I'll do that, and I'm not scared anymore. It was like the whole thing was like moving through something that was like the equivalent of when you get stuck in a social taboo and you can't open your mouth. That's the nigredo part in a minor way, in a minor way. And it happens in all sorts of ways, I think. But that's one of the ways it happened for me, and was a fantastic liberation. I'm a different person now.
The coleslaw of transformation has.
I couldn't resist coming in because, but I've got a slight impediment. I'm very reminded of the death of bits of my body at the moment, because just before the session started, a very large tooth fell out, and I feel as though I'm speaking in a really weird way. But anyway, I've got the tooth, and the dentist is going to try and stick it back in tomorrow. But Charlotte, I can't let you get away with finishing up by saying what you said. Because death has everything, as I know you really know, to do with life. But for me, I just wanted to bring us back to Borowed. For me, Borowed's beginning has been like a river that has flowed through everything, and I've kept coming back to it. And one of the other Yoruba proverbs, I think that he said, was something along the lines of, we must be willing to die in order to live. And I think it's so important so I'm trying to get to hope, Matt and Richard. I maybe will get there somewhere. For me, I think that is in itself hopeness. Our engagement with death is the thing that helps us to live deeply and fully. And for me, I think that has certainly been the case since working very, very closely with people who are dying for the last 10 years. I think my life, and everybody, I think most of you may agree, but my life has been enriched beyond words by being in deep, deep intimacy with others, with the death of others. Yeah, that's my bit. But Charlotte, I'm not going to have a rant with Charlotte Ducan.
I was looking forward to having a bit of a fisticuffs, but I think you must have missed. I can't remember your saying that death.
You said death has absolutely nothing to do with life, but maybe it was in a context that I hadn't.
It was in a very
I hadn't quite clocked due to the tooth.
Let's blame the tooth. Well, blame the tooth. No worries. No, I totally agree with you, Anna. Absolutely. And I think what the difficulty we are in, and maybe this comes back to the alchemy, as a culture, is that part of us actually does have to die. Not die in the sense of leaving the planet. Well, we all will at one time, because that's, we will. But part of our identity, the way we've been, the beings we've been in this story, in this narrative of progress, in this narrative of supremacy, in this narrative of anthropological, we're the ones that matter. That bit has to die. And it's very difficult really to come into a space or to come be with people, have a conversation where that is accepted totally. Because we can say it, then we can say it intellectually, but what does it mean to die as a people? You know, to die as a people together, actually, hopefully, not in isolation, not as Tom was saying, you know, finding it really difficult on your own, but that we have a culture that goes, yes, as a not as a species, but really as a westernized culture, really have to let it go.
But isn't this sorry, no, go on.
No, carry on.
Well, I think this is to do with the quality of the conversation, which has already come in. And you know, there's something about the doulaing of us as a world, the doulaing of us in these conversations. And one of the other things that's really struck me about these 3 days, which is the quality of the holding of the conversations, which has been done by Matt and Richard and that wonderful team. You know, even, you know, Carrie coming in this morning to a session where someone couldn't show their presentation, but actually we got a complete sense of the presentation, though we never even had it, because of the nature of the interaction between those who were on the stage and those who were talking, and that's persisted. So there's something about the holding of this space, the quality of holding, and I think it is the same kind of quality that we aspire as doulas to hold around people who are dying. And it's that's the hope. The hope for me here is that and the delight is that we've been able to hold this space here, and I would want to, you know, well, more holding of these kinds of spaces.
I think you're totally right there, Anna. It really feels like, and there's a quality, somebody mentioned the word tenderness. I think if the world could be more tender, if we could be more better, greater attention, then to allow the transformations and the things that need to happen in order for us to be in sync with what's going on the planet, you know, what needs to be remediated would be so much easier, instead of this hostile, aggressive culture that we live in, you know, if that could be changed somehow. So that's great.
No spat then, Charlotte. I'm off.
Hello, Charlotte. Fascinating stuff. A question about the perhaps hostility towards and hatred for the dead. You talked about closeness with the dead. It's incredibly discouraged. I mean, in the late 1980s, I had the strangest bodyguarding job I ever had. I was actually guarding a body of Edwin Mackenzie, a guy known as Diogenes, who my friend Robert Lenkowitz had embalmed and was keeping the body as a memento mori. The authorities took the position that they should either bury or incinerate it forcibly if necessary. And so a game of cat and mouse began with the Plymouth City authorities chasing this corpse we were hiding all over the city. Robert had to go to London for 3 or 4 days, and I ended up being bodyguard to the body. And I had the privilege of spending 3 days just as a minder on my own in a big empty studio. The electricity was cut off. It was by candlelight. It was quite gothic. But I felt a real privilege and a real responsibility being able to spend 3 days and 3 nights guarding the body of a dead man. I felt really close to him. I read books to him. It was like an old-fashioned wake. But the hatred that people, this was seen by the city authorities as a piece of waste which needed to be disposed of. You know? They were quite fanatical about it. And we managed to defend the body and win the legal case, and Diogenes is still dead and well. So I think that the hatred of the dead, the fear of contamination is still a deep and irrational thing in our society.
Yeah, I think you're really right. Well, I think what Catherine was saying about all these decisions being made about assisted dying was right on. You know, it's like people have got no experience of making decisions about people who are in pain or people who want to move on, as it were. But that's also our culture, isn't it? People making big decisions about all kinds of things, particularly to do with the climate crisis as well, that don't know a damn thing about the planet.
Yes.
That's where we are. Anyway, I don't want to be. I'm holding you company up here. I don't really want to keep talking, but I'm just hoping somebody else is going to come in and join us, Mark. But that's a fascinating experience.
Do you find rage plays a part? Just while you, oh, no, you've got another question coming.
Oh, good. Is someone coming?
I heard it. The digital elves are.
Ah, it's Tom.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's me. Well, I just wanted to add a bit about a body after Mark's interesting tale. I cooked a goose for the first time last Christmas, and I think you Mark, you saying how you felt privileged being with that human body. I felt greatly privileged having the body of a goose to cook and to eat. I mean, I do when I cook a chicken, and I don't do it very often. And I try and use everything of that that I can of that bird, and I make the stock. And in the past, I have boiled the bones and kept the bones for just because they're beautiful things. But the goose was something different again because I'd not encountered it, and I just wonder. You know, I've been with a few of my relatives in the Chapel of Rest, and been with their bodies, and most recently with my grandmother. And for the first time on my own, actually, without any of my siblings or parents or anything. And she was 93. She'd had a good long life, and I felt very at ease being there because she'd had a long life, and it seemed the right way of things, the right order of things. And I think it is a privilege to be alongside a dead body, and it is a moment in life that maybe, as I was talking with Catherine about, you know, not many people experience it, and they think it's a weird thing, or they think it's somehow, I don't want to remember my loved one in that state of death. But actually, I think it's I don't know. For me, it is meeting an end point, which isn't the end. It's just an end of a physical relationship, perhaps. I don't know if I'm adding more to things or not, but it's just an experience.
I'm not sure you're adding more to things, Tom. Things add more to themselves in a way. You know, there's a real weird materialist libidinal dynamic that goes on with the dead. You know, the empty sky atheists like Richard Dawkins, who just say, well, there's no soul, there's no spirit, there's no God, it's just, you know, matter is all there is. That sort of reductive materialism really can't explain. All it can do is call it a delusion. The curious power the dead have to transmit energies, and they do. They transmit all sorts of energies. For example, just last week, the training shoes of a dead basketball player, Michael Jordan, sold for $1.4 million. Kurt Cobain's jumper selling for, you know, $400,000 and so on. These are secular relics. There is this sense there is something like what the Muslims call baraka, which passes through these things, and it's entirely real. It's as real as land ownership is real or property ownership is real. You know, the desire creates the reality of these things, and they are charged objects. They're charged objects. No two ways about it. Very charged objects. If a burglar goes into somebody's house and steals all their money, that's seen as bad, but it's not a terrible crime. Whereas if a burglar puts everything in a bag, and in that bag is the pair of child's shoes or your granddad's medal or something, because that is an object belonging to the dead, there is general and quite right public outrage that is a totemic object which has been violated by that theft. Yeah, the dead do confer power and meaning to all sorts of things in very obvious ways for me. Yeah.
That's very well put, Mark.
I'm going to Mark and Tom. Is it okay? I've got Katerina and June have both come in, and they haven't spoken yet. And I'm loving the conversation, but I'd really like to bring in Katerina and June before then we start to move into a wrap phase. We've got the last few announcements, but sorry to be.
It's all right.
No, somebody's got to stop me. Yeah. Stop me before I do it again.
Over to June, and welcome, June. Lovely to see you there, and to Katerina after that.
I just wanted to say that it was much later in my life, and it's quite a long life now, that I encountered having contact with dead bodies. And the one I remember most clearly was the death of my ex-father-in-law, who I loved a great deal. And it was a Sunday in the hospital, and I said, to the nurse, could I help wash him? And she said, well, I'm a bit short-staffed, so, you know, more hands. And it was the most beautiful act to do. It was the final act of love, and to be gentle to him. And I was absolutely sure he was there. He was there and was experiencing it. And when the priest came and said, go forth on thy journey, Christian soul, I knew that he went. And I knew that he was glad. He was glad that his body was loved. And that was the last thing that was done. And I too worked in an undertaker as part of my training to be a priest. And it was quite remarkable. One of my jobs was to lock the chapels of rest. So cover the face, turn up the air conditioning, blow out the candles. And I knew that in some places there was a presence in the room, and in other places the presence had gone. So I have a real sense that we've lost in our society the fact that death is a process. It is not a moment. And that process carries on for a long time after the declaration of death. And that there needs respect and honor for the presence that is going, however you see that presence to be. And some people actually see the presence going. I know when I went to the third month of John Taverner's death, and we went to the Orthodox Church, I had a real sense that I could see him moving further away. And my Afro-Caribbean people expect me as a priest to go and do something after 6 weeks to enable that. So all those practices, both before death, but after death, I don't understand what the presence is, but there is a presence, has to be treated with honor, respect, and the love that we treat those people in life. And I just wanted to share that with you. It is a mystery. I don't understand it, but I know that it's there. And I know that it needs love, tenderness, and gentleness in the same way as you would treat that person when they were whatever alive is. Thank you for allowing me to share that.
Thank you, June.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me? Oh, brilliant. Well, that was wonderful. Thank you so much, June. And I just, it occurred to me, I didn't have anything to share, but when the first call came out for the conference in 2019, I thought, oh, I'd love to put something forward. I don't know if this is my area at all, or if I've ever thought about this, or if I have any work to share. And funnily enough, today, in the last day of the conference, which I joined very last minute as a steward, I looked at my bookshelf and I thought, oh, I've done this thing years ago, and I've never shared it with anyone, and I'm just going to show it to you now. It's when my grandmother died, and Tom, is it? Yeah, Tom. When Tom was talking about being in his family's presence, his ancestors' presence by himself, it came out of that. When my grandmother died, it was about 12 years ago. I then felt very compelled to spend more time in the cemetery. I wasn't entirely sure why that was, but after she was buried, the days that followed, I just ended up there quite a lot. And I produced this book, which is handmade. It comes out like that, and I'm just going to show you, just because I can, and just because I've never showed it to anyone. And it's photographs of that cemetery where my grandmother is and around her grave. And it's got gestures that people have left, the presence of them for their loved ones, and the photographs really interest me, just very quickly. And there's quite a lot of water and rainwater that collected in objects, and some Bible pages. But yeah, I just wanted to share because it just occurred to me that I could very well have said something about this, but I'd completely forgotten it. But so yeah, thank you for allowing me to share that.
That was a really lovely punctuation mark. Oh, I've got a bounce back in my ear there. That was really lovely punctuation mark, Katerina. Thank you. And I think we're just kind of doing, behind the scenes housekeeping here and thinking there's a really nice flow here, and maybe it's good to begin to wrap while we're. Do you mind muting so I don't get myself bouncing back? Thanks. To quit while we're ahead, I think is the expression I'm looking for. To keep while the energies, and I realized there's one thing. So I'm going to admit to a failure, and I'm going to make some announcements about things we're going to do in the next few weeks, and then I'm going to close with a poem, as we opened with a poem from one of our absent friends and guests who joined us in the months leading up to this event. So the failure, you may have noticed, I think the failure is a really interesting offering in itself. We never quite got it together to collate messages to COP. And I think that's my message to COP, is we were too busy doing this. And I would like to send COP a picture of the back of my head, actually. My attention is turned here, and whatever this is that we're doing here, that's where I'm going to put my energy. What did they say? I remember one of the Global South delegates saying, "The time for words is over, it's time to act." That was in 1990. So lest we go on a COP rant, I'm just going to leave it there. I think I'm very happy with that message to COP. And that's COP done with. Sorry, I just co-opted you all into a message to COP you might feel completely differently about. And I have absolute power because Richard's let me in and no one else. Meanwhile, we're going to take a little while to upload all the films from the last few days. I think it's a good moment because I know the work it's going to take Richard basically to do that. I think a thank you is due to Richard and Kat and Carrie and all of those who've been here behind the scenes. His Carrie and particularly Kat, I think it's fair to say, has been, Richard and Kat have been doing a scary amount of work together as the production team, and enormous pressure at points holding it. But I also want to thank all of you, because when I tried Hop In for the first time 3 weeks ago, I was seriously scared, actually. It was like, oh my God, what are we doing? We're going to this? I don't know my way around here. I don't know anything. And it was a disorienting moment. And I think I've seen other people going through that since, and you've kind of ridden it out, and we've managed to make this happen in an unfamiliar space. So I'm really, really grateful that happened. And if I haven't named you in the thanks for the production team, I'm sorry, but you know who you are, and thanks to all of you. Robin, of course, who's been feeding us and caring for us. Mr. Robin, whatever his name is, I don't know Robin's second name, but anyway, Robin, familiar to First Friday, art.earth people. Robin's been doing a fine job of looking after us. So the slow work is going to be uploading the content. It is going to happen. Bear with us, and we will be bringing pretty much, the vast part of what we've shared over the last few days, with one or two exceptions, online for open access sharing. But meanwhile, in the nearer term, there are a few more things still to happen as part of this cycle. If you happen to be in Falmouth in a couple of weeks, November the 18th, we've got the artist John Jordan, now Jay Jordan, with Isabel Fremo, launching their new book, We Are Nature Defending Itself, The Entanglement of Art, Activism and Autonomous Zones. We're going to try and stream that, and if you can forgive me if we don't succeed. It depends on capacity, but if we have someone up for streaming it, we will be trying to create a stream of it through art.earth. Our dear friend Mark Watson, who you've met several times during the last few days and the last hour or so, has proposed some kind of Dark Mountain hosted, Mark Watson hosted open plague cafe of the kind we referred to earlier. So a chance to go away from here and just kind of decompress, let things settle, and then just come back for a kind of open discussion, not necessarily bringing things that happened here, but just where this has taken you. And our friend Tony Spencer, one of the steering team who's been here throughout this process, is Tony and I are looking at cooking a 4-hour writing workshop led by Tony. That will have a kind of small fee attached to it for those that want to do it, and will be a more structured led project for 4 hours, using the template of her work with Vulture that some of you may be familiar with, close to Bio's work in many ways, and Tony's collaborated with Bio much over the years. Some of you may know her from that context. That's slated for December the 3rd to be confirmed. On November the 30th, that's the 10th. It's not the 10th anniversary. 10th anniversary. I was wondering whether to call it an anniversary or whatever. It's the 10th Remembrance Day for Lost Species. And we're going to be marking that in Falmouth and online through art.earth by welcoming the climate psychologist Caroline Hickman, who's going to give us a talk on that day. And Caroline's really, really good. And I urge all of you to that. It'll be free access as with most of our events of this kind. Come and join us on that evening. And I think an artist friend in Falmouth is preparing, as we speak, a sound piece that's going to launch that evening, speaking to our theme, that I'll say no more about. Did you and Anna, is that live? Do you want me to, have you and Anna got far enough from that for me to mention that, or is that another thing and we'll leave it?
Yeah, we can put it in, we can mention it.
Anna, you can just come on screen and cut me off if I've got this wrong, but I think another thing that we're looking at is that there's a listening circle of the kind that was discussed. Do you want to say anything about the listening circle, Anna? That's great, before I mangle it. But that sounded a great idea. I'd love to see that happen. So
yes, it's a listening circle. Some of you may have heard of. It's just an opportunity for us to share thoughts, our own thoughts about death and dying in a particular way, which essentially is about us listening and witnessing each other's contributions rather than responding to us. And it comes, I suppose, from a little bit of what's been talked about today, the fact that there are so many, our lives are so full, and our tendency is to want to respond more sometimes than to listen. So essentially the idea would be to just offer a held space for about an hour and 20 minutes, depending on how many people. And normally we would offer it for maybe a group of 6 people at a time. And it's an open space simply to talk from your hearts, really, about what death and dying means to you, your experiences of death and dying. And I would facilitate it. So that's the offer, if people were interested in doing that.
That would be great. Thanks, Anna. And we'll liaise with how to set that up so people can find it. But thank you for that. Have I forgotten anything before I bring Pascal in to close us? I think we're good, aren't we? So we started with a poet. I thought, let's end with a poet too. Let's bookend these 3 wonderful days together with 2 of the friends who've joined us in recent months. So on that catacomb of previous events down at the bottom of our webpage, if you go down far enough, you'll find one from the Cornwall-based poet Pascal Petit. Is she in Cornwall? I think Pascal's in Cornwall. She used to be. It's a really great talk with Pascal, and she's a great poet. And I'm going to finish with a poem that Pascal read for us then, so you can hear her reading it to do it proper justice. But I think as we started with Dom's, let's end with Pascal's. Green bee eater. More precious than all the gems of Jaipur, the green bee eater. If you see one singing, tree, 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 with his space black bill and rufous cap, his robes all shades of emerald, like treetops glimpsed from a plane, his blue cheeks, black eye mask, and the delicate tail streamer like a plume of smoke. You might dream of the forests that once clothed our flying planet. And perhaps his singing is a spell to call our forests back, tree by tree by tree. Thanks, everyone.